Hello and welcome to my very first Star Wars Versus video. The matchup will be split into 3 rounds. Round 1 will be physical abilities and gear, round 2 will compare their combative abilities and their weaponry, and round 3 will compare their supernatural and force abilities. I'll then give an educated verdict on who I believe would come out on top in an unbiased 1v1 fight. Anyways, without further ado, let's get on with it. Episode 1, Kao-Cen Darach vs Mundi. Round 1, physical abilities and gear. Mundi was a Saurian male 73 years old at the time of his death. I'll be using him as depicted at this point in his life, as I feel he is at his best combatively, with the experience of the Clone Wars despite being past his physical prime. He stood at just under 2 meters tall, and had a sturdy build. He remained in excellent shape despite his age, and could contend and keep up with far younger opponents. In terms of biology, Saurians are very similar to humans, with their strength, speed, and life expectancy. The key difference being their enlarged cranium holding a binary brain. They also have not one, but 2 hearts to help support this brain by better regulating the blood flow. Though the enlarged head could be a point of vulnerability, it has never been shown being targeted, so I'll assume it isn't an issue for Mundi in combat. However, the extra heart could go a long way towards making up for his advanced age, enabling his circulatory system to deliver oxygen around his body at a faster rate, increasing his stamina. Also, through the sustaining powers of the light side, beings who study as a Jedi usually have a longer life expectancy anyways, and their physical prime can extend far further than that of a regular being. Certainly Saurian Jedi, and in fact Mundi himself, has shown high levels of stamina, even when compared to other Jedi, even other Jedi Masters. During the Battle of Hypori, the Republic forces were completely decimated following the huge engagement, and the remaining Jedi were pushed back, taking shelter in the wreckage of their own ship. The Jedi are all exhausted, as explained by Mundi himself. However, the 2 Saurians, Mundi included, appear far more capable to deal with their fatigue than the other Jedi who are far younger than Mundi. What's more, Mundi was then able to contend with the great Jedi killer General Grievous, on par with Shakti. Shakti is a fellow Council Master, and as a Togrutan, her biology grants her incredible hardiness, backed up by her comparative youth. This feat from Mundi is made even more impressive by the fact that the General is favouring to attack Mundi all throughout the fight, and the fact that Mundi is the only one that made it out unscathed. So he certainly has incredible stamina and resilience as a fighter. He also has great physical hardiness and incredible tolerance for injury. After he engaged Grievous with tea, he was violently kicked against a stone column, which then fell on top of him. Despite this, he got back up and re-engaged into the fight after mere seconds. During the second Battle of Geonosis, Mundi's gunship crash-landed, leaving him badly injured around the abdominal area. Despite this, he still manages to fight out the entire battle. The severity of the injuries is shown by the fact that he needed immediate medical attention following the battle. He also endured another gunship crash, and even more impressively came out unharmed, and would have been able to continue his fight with Ventress had she not fled. He has shown standard use of acrobatics, but nothing to write home about, and his speed was admirable, especially considering his age, but shows nothing warranting his placement above his fellow Jedi peers. Though a little grounded and lacking in speed, Mundi is a capable, strong, and physically hardy individual. As for gear, he has nothing besides the ordinary Jedi robes, albeit a little unique, and a standard Jedi utility belt, with basic gear. Kao-Cen Darach was a Zabrak male approximately 1 meter 80 in height. Based on the footage of him we have seen, he appears to be around middle-aged, I would guess 40 to 45 years old. Zabraks are distinguished by a crown of head horns and impressive physiques. They are first and foremost warriors, and everything about them screams aggression. Zabraks have an outstanding tolerance for pain, as well as an enhanced physical output such as increased strength, speed and stamina. This is supported by a second heart, much the same as with Saurians, though in this case the heart directly helps the physical output, whereas with Saurians the heart supports the brain, with increased physical output being a byproduct. Because of this, you do not want to mess with a Zabrak, especially a male. They will mess you up. Certainly Darach was able to endure a duel alongside Satil against 2 Sith. This was then followed by a 2-on-1 engagement with him against both Sith. He then separated the Sith and bested Vindicant in 1-on-1 combat before engaging Malgus, where he stood strong for many blows before eventually going down. A true testament to his endurance, especially considering he was coming into the fight having battled his way into the hangar past countless troops and droids. He hardly came fresh into the engagement. so it's clear that Darach's stamina is most impressive. I would briefly like to touch upon his death, and the cause of it, as many put it down to his lack of stamina, and his tiredness. I personally see it not as physical weariness. Instead, I believe that Darach used all of his power in his last act of telekinesis, throwing the engine at Malgus. This desperate last effort drained him of his energy, leaving him ill-suited to continue fighting straight after. It was not physical exhaustion, but exhaustion of his powers, if that makes sense. Anyways, that's just my interpretation of it. His speed is likewise most impressive, outmanoeuvring the elaborate blade work of Vindicant's saber-staff to deal the final blow. He also incorporated some acrobatics and jumps into his sequences, demonstrating his agility and relative lightness on his feet compared to Mundi. In terms of gear, Darach wears a full set of Jedi battle armor, typical of the Jedi during times of great wars. Though it is not stated what the material that the armor is made from, standard Jedi armor is extremely durable whilst maintaining maneuverability and a low weight. It can also be seen turning a reasonable slash from a lightsaber, though a dedicated power blow can still break through the armor plating. As for other gear, Darach is equipped with standard Jedi gear within his utility belt. Though the gear probably differs from Mundi's due to a different time period, I am unable to find the exact differences, so I'll assume the sets have to be very similar. Though this is probably negligible in the engagement, as Jedi field gear is seldom used during one-on-one combat. And now for the verdict. When it comes down to it, the edge is quite obvious to me in this round, but let me break it down. For stamina, I would put them very even. They both have 2 hearts, and can both sustain their life through the light side. However, Darach has youth on his side, and his biology leans more towards physical output, so I would give him the slight advantage. It's basically the same story for strength. Both even, but with Darach being the slightly more capable. In terms of physical toughness, I would put them on par, with the natural biology of Zabrak meaning Darach can naturally take more of a beating, whilst Mundi's demonstrations have shown that he can hold up just the same. In fact, I am tempted to say better. With speed and agility, Darach appears to have the fairly clear edge, being much lighter on his feet and more willing to incorporate acrobatics into combat. And then Darach has the advantage of his battle armour, limiting his manoeuvrability slightly, though this is made up for by his sizable advantage in his ability to take damage. Overall, I give Kao-Cen Darach the comfortable advantage for round 1. Round 2. Combative abilities and weaponry. As his weapon, Mundi wielded a fairly standard single-bladed lightsaber with a blue lightsaber crystal as its focusing lens. This gave the blade good fluidity and manoeuvrability, useful for the one-handed grip that he often sported. He was held in high esteem in the Order and was regarded as a master duelist. He participated in the First Battle of Geonosis after having been selected as one of the 212 members of the Jedi Strike Team by Mace Windu. Not only did he survive, as one of the Jedi in the circle that Yoda created a perimeter around, but he would also go on to lead the new clone forces into battle against the CIS, being one of only 33 to survive the entire engagement. It is of my belief that in order to have survived the execution arena, one must have been at least an advanced practitioner of Surisu or Xian on my scale, or an advanced master of Shicho. Mundi has displayed the solid defence and subtle dodges of Surisu, and has often chosen to deflect bolts out of harm's way as opposed to redirecting them along a chosen vector, which is what Xian incorporates. He has shown great skill against lightsaber wielding adversaries too, capably stonewalling the onslaught of Grievous for an impressive amount of time, despite being exhausted and despite Grievous blatantly favouring to attack Mundi the whole time. This latter point in of itself is telling, showing that the General saw Mundi as a greater threat than all the others, Shakti included I might add, wanting to eliminate him from the equation as soon as possible. Though I would hereby place Mundi as at least a basic master of Form 3, I would hesitate to call him an advanced master of it, as his guard was eventually broken by Grievous, and it was blaster fire that ultimately struck him down, though I would add that he was severely caught off guard by his own troops, and had survived rushing headlong into a barrage of droid blaster bolts without suffering a scratch leading up to this. Mundi is also noted as a master of Form 2, the Makashi style of lightsaber combat. This form is specifically derived for blade-to-blade fencing, and as mentioned before, Mundi almost always demonstrates the signature one-handed grip, aimed towards precision over power, giving better blade control over brute force. It should be noted though, that when pressed with a brutish offense, as with Grievous, Mundi is quick to adjust to a two-handed grip, more common amongst Surisu. It is a little unclear how proficient Mundi is as a Makashi duelist, but he did earn a lot of praise in the dueling arena, and was a designated master of the style. With a clear preference for the technique, as showcased by his grip, combined with his great experience as a Jedi Guardian,
I feel safe to call his skills in the area at least on the level of his Surisu. In fact, I would place him as an advanced master of the form, as he used it as his main style as opposed to a supplement style like he did with the Surisu. As a result, his practice of Makashi would be above that of his Surisu, and his corresponding skill with it would, in my opinion, showcase this. Mundi often paired up Makashi with the Ataru form. The most common form at the time, Ataru was one of the most versatile and the most battlefield-oriented of all the classical forms. It incorporated hand-to-hand combat training, which Mundi has shown high levels of skill in, and also included dual-blade fencing training. Though Mundi's employment of this tactic hasn't been shown, I am sure his familiarity with the technique through his Ataru training would have gone a long ways towards his victory against Ventress. Mundi often pairs up the efficiency of Makashi with the elaborate swordplay of Ataru to form his personalised fighting style. I would hereby say that his skills in Form 4 run dead parallel with his skill in Form 2, and although he rarely employs the two techniques separately, the combined use makes for an overall advanced display of lightsaber combat. This makes him a great all-round duelist, with Form 2 precision, Form 3 defense, and Form 4 speed and offense. Though he wasn't a complete master of any one of these styles, his range of techniques makes him perfectly optimized to deal with a variety of combat situations. It is clear to me why he was held in such high esteem with such an overwhelming package with all of his bases covered. He can employ Ataru acrobatics to get out of a tough spot should his guard fail him, or his martial arts skills such as grapples if the situation starts pointing south. Overall, he has all of his bases covered to a high degree of expertise. As his weapon, Kao-Cen Darach wielded a fairly standard, if a little chunky, single-bladed lightsaber, with the green lightsaber crystal as its focusing lens. This gave his blade good fluidity and maneuverability, ideal when paired off with the balance of his fighting style. Darach was a Jedi Battle Master of his era. In order for one to become a Jedi Battle Master, one must have mastered all classical forms of lightsaber combat, that being Forms 1 through 7, as well as the Jarkai dual-blade fencing, most specifically linked to Form 4 and Form 6. As a result, Darach would have been a master of all of the forms, and would have advanced knowledge and integration of them all. His preferred form is never stated, but from his combat it is clear that he mainly utilises Naiman, the sixth form. Also known as the Diplomat's form, it was created by Jedi consulars who saw lightsaber combat as an art, not as a weapon, and were more than a little turned off by the aggression offered by Ataru and Gemso. As a result, Naiman is more passive and not as offensive, essentially a mix of the basic elements of the 5 previous forms. Though very watered down, a practitioner is adequate in every area. As a result, a user of Naiman is good at everything but excellent at nothing. No weaknesses but no strengths to back themselves on. The idea being that if a Jedi is not interested in combat, they could study the form briefly and it would give them enough skill to get by, allowing them to concentrate on other areas, such as force abilities. However, if studied hard enough and taken to the nth degree, it can become something very different. The jack-of-all-trades get-by style can be turned into a master of everything, no weaknesses, and strengths in every area style. This requires the user to have mastered all forms 1 through 5 and to have studied Naiman to the extent that they can seamlessly switch between the differing techniques. As a result, Naiman is easy to pick up but unequally hard to fully master. As a Jedi Battle Master, Darach would have basic mastery of the first 5 forms, and his mastery of Naiman shows his extended study of it, and therefore his ability to mix and match between styles. As a result, I would say that he has indeed taken the form past its basics, moulding it into the weapon that it was never meant to be. This is shown by the fact that he was able to use a style to simultaneously fend off 2 Sith Lords, hardly a display of a mere basic practitioner. As a result, I would grant Darach advanced mastery in the field of Naiman. I could also say this for Ataru. Clearly one of the main building blocks for his diverse swordplay, Form 4 offered speed and acrobatics that Darach often fed off. His skill in Forms 4 and 6 also stems to an advanced mastery of Jarkai fencing, and he was able to mix and mould both styles of dual weapon fencing into one devastating onslaught. He showed great skill incorporating it into a saber staff, instructing Satele to a high level in the technique. He has shown equal skill in his combat with separate blades, taking an offensive stance against 2 Sith Lords using this method. In the initial sequences after Satele retreated, Darach was able to combine both techniques into wielding 3 blades at once. He would once again demonstrate the skill when he bested Vindicant in single combat. This incredible diversity, skill, and ability to mix and match different styles seamlessly into one speaks very highly to his overall skill as a swordsman. Comparing these two in single combat can be a little difficult. We've seen very little from Mundi, seeing him go toe-to-toe with Grievous, though he was very exhausted at the time, and seeing him ward off Ventress, though she ultimately fled the fight. We also saw a brief skirmish with Het and Ura Singh, although Mundi did very little in the way of actual combat. We have never seen him engage in single combat and definitively prevail. We can conclude that Ventress would have been vested in the end. She herself openly admitted this in the act of fleeing the engagement, considering she ran. This is an extremely impressive feat, considering Ventress was a famed Jedi killer of the Clone Wars. She has bested Kit Fisto, almost bested Plo Koon, though he did have a broken arm at the time, and has contended admirably against such greats as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Grievous, Anakin Skywalker, and even Mace Windu himself. The natural conclusion drawn from this is that Mundi is comparable to these great Jedi Masters in single combat, and as a result definitely holds his place as one of the best duelists of the time. Even more notable considering how many master duelists lived during this era. General Grievous throws even more of a spanner in the works, with possibly the least consistent skill set throughout the Star Wars media. Unless I state otherwise, I will be drawing the information in my videos from both Canon and Legends continuity. As a result, on the one hand, we have an unstoppable monster of a Jedi Crusher, and on the other hand, we have a solid but not overwhelming Jedi killer, who is inclined to flee if victory isn't definitive. The Grievous Mundi fought was the unstoppable monster from the Micro series, not the reasonably powerful coward from TCW. As a result, I will be comparing how Mundi fared in the engagement to how other Jedi fared against this particular portrayal of Grievous. The Grievous Mundi held his own against was a monster of death. He has been displayed with the physical might to literally crush a person beneath his feet like a bug. He was able to ward off 5 Jedi at once, most, if not all of which, were still outmatched. Even Jedi Masters were nothing to him, slaying a crook in a matter of seconds, and contending with the combined assault of 2 Jedi High Counselors at once, though in this later engagement I would say he was probably outmatched, opting to separate the combatants and deal with them one by one. Despite this, and despite the Jedi being exhausted, it is still very, very impressive. He also went on the offense against 2 fully energized Jedi Masters at once, besting them both in a matter of seconds once all 4 of his blades were drawn. All of this, and yes, an exhausted Ki-Adi-Mundi was able to stonewall the general for the best part of a minute, even able to gain ground in some places and go on the offensive. What's more, he was the only Jedi left standing of the 6 by the end of the confrontation. Darach is also difficult. He has only been witnessed in 1 duel, but this isn't the problem, not directly anyways. What makes this difficult is the fact that for the most part Darach was fighting with 2 or 3 blades, extra blades that he would not have access to on the even battlefield that I will be pitting the 2 combatants against on. For this fight he will only have his own weapons. He initially fought well against Vindican, though I would say he matched him pretty evenly. However, when given chance, he took up his apprentice's blade alongside his own. Despite the unfamiliarity with the weapon, Draath still chose to wield it, adapting to the fight. This shows that he was not confident enough in his skills with his own weapon to reject Steele's, instead choosing to gamble and wield multiple blades against the Sith. With a single blade, his defences crumbled somewhat towards the end of the duel, being jabbed, slashed at, disarmed, and then struck down with lightning speed by Malgus. Malgus was but an apprentice at the time, but he was enraged by his master's death. What's more, Darach was exhausted after his telekinesis, and was far from fresh to defend himself. It does however speak to the fact that his defences were far from impenetrable. He clearly favoured an offensive stance throughout the duel, and his defences were not ultimately enough to save his life. His abilities with 9-man are deduced from 2 factors, his balance and moderation, which is the key philosophy of 9-man, and his incorporation of force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences. The latter I will get more into in the next round. The former, however, is very relevant in this round. His balanced approach to combat allows him to maintain basic defense against one opponent, whilst on the offense against the other. I feel he will be able to employ this just as well in single combat, as in this engagement against Mundi, by having his defences covered even when he is still taking an offensive stance. However, this strength could also be a weakness. It prevents him from completely falling into offense, which could be a poor showing against Mundi. Mundi's basic mastery of Surisu leaves him very competent in defense, and though not impenetrable like true masters are said to be, only a dedicated and brutal offense could push him past the edge. Darach is more skillful than he is overwhelming, a skill which is matched, in my opinion, by Mundi. During his lightsaber fights, the only way he was able to pierce his enemy's defences was through force powers, or from turning their attacks against each other, presenting an opening. He never outright outfenced them, even when he bested Vindicant in single combat. He simply had options available that normally wouldn't be, with the saber staff alongside his own saber.
Rather than overpowering his opponent, he feinted an attack to lure his opponent into an overhand strike, which he brought his second saber up to block. Leaving his opponent exposed, he simply had to employ his advantage with the saber staff's twin blades, an advantage his opponent had overlooked. Though a very skillful demonstration and a great on-the-spot demonstration of his tactical mind, the amount of options open to him allowed for a more diverse skill base than would normally be available. With his own single saber, he stood at even ground against Vindicant, perhaps even backpedaling slightly, and was forced to use his force ability to put some space between them. Ki-Adi-Mundi's offense and defense are far more black and white, either attacking or defending, a stark contrast between the balanced technique of Darach. Though it would often be seen as a disadvantage against an opponent employing such tactics as Darach, Mundi's one-trick mind flourished. It allowed for a solid defense when needed, and when Darach inevitably broke off, Mundi could overwhelm. With Ataru's speed and Makashi precision, his offense would probe for weaknesses, jabbing around the Zabrach's guard, whilst his Ataru flourishes would keep the Blademaster on his toes, not giving him the room he needed to instigate a counter-attack. Darach's swordplay is more in line with battlefield engagements, where he can keep his options open with all that's going on around him, and can merge his offense with his defense to simultaneously chop down the bodies of his enemies, whilst balancing his defense against other foes. This tactic works well in single combat when against an opponent of equal or lower skill, waiting for an opening for the finishing blow. But Mundi's offense would leave no room for an opening, and without the extra options available with additional blades to deal the cards in his favour, Darach would crumble. Darach may be an advanced 9-man master, but this doesn't mean he is completely immune to the form's weaknesses. Darach has not proven to be dominant in any one technique, instead blurring the lines between multiple, and as a result, works his way around an opponent instead of smashing through them. And simply put, Mundi has all his bases covered, and his own offense is bringing much of the same attributes that Darach does. In terms of defense, we look to their respective showings. Mundi defended against Grievous for the best part of a minute, whilst Darach only lasted about 10 seconds against Apprentice Malgus with his single blade. Yes, Malgus was out by rage, but I still don't see him as being as intense as 2003 Grievous was at that point in his career. You could say that Darach was exhausted at the time, but it was noted by Mundi himself that he was too, so it is still a fair comparison. Both offer skillful and powerful offensives, but Mundi is the more capable of dealing with such an assault. Even though Darach would make him work for it, with no overwhelming attribute to throw Mundi off, I don't see Darach coming out on top. Overall, I give Ki-Adi-Mundi the slight advantage for round 2. Round 3. Supernatural and Force abilities. Ki-Adi-Mundi, despite being a dedicated swordsman, was also amongst the most powerful force wielders of his time. His training started later in life, resulting in slow progress to start with. However, over time, and with possibly the greatest mentor of all time, Mundi found his rhythm, after which he was able to learn and adapt quickly. The great potential sensed by the Dark Woman when she brought him to the Order became realised, and his raw power eclipsed that of the majority of his peers. His telekinetic abilities were some of his most advanced. A dedicated force push from him was shown to leave a crater in the hull of the Republic assault ship on which he fought on Hypori. He was also capable of releasing such power in a more scattered wave of force energy, which demonstrated the power to throw back an entire tribe of Tusken warriors. We have never truly seen Mundi's upper edge with telekinesis, as he has succeeded to lift every object he has attempted to. The most impressive feat was him using the force to lift a large buried desert skiff, lifting it from under the sand with little more than casual effort, and bearing in mind that he had just been buried under said sand for an undefined period of time, and as a result was badly injured. Given the size of the skiff as shown, and the fact that it was buried beneath tons of sand too, I would compare this power to the likes of Yoda's lifting of Luke's X-Wing starfighter. I would also like to add that Mundi did this with less effort than Yoda took, although the Grandmaster was hardly in the prime of his life at the time. His physical augmentation is very impressive, able to leap fast and high enough to evade the strike of Grievous, and was also able to move with such speed as to evade the attacks of a Krayt Dragon, a vicious and malicious beast. His telepathic abilities were also very advanced. He has shown great skill in beast control ability, and his force senses allowed him to sense Ethelmon amongst the many thousands of life forms. He could also sense not just the fear within Anakin, but the source of it, centering around his mother. He could also use the Force to extract information from the minds of unwilling beings, and was capable of sensing inanimate objects, such as when he retrieved his lightsaber from buried underneath the sand. Mundi had great skills in the healing arts too, able to repair his greatly broken collarbone in a matter of seconds, whilst in meditation, though he could not mend his broken arm. Though the ability is too intensive for use in single combat, should there be a break-off in the duel, Mundi would likely be able to repair small wounds or bruises. This is mere speculation, however. Overall, Mundi has a very broad skill set, and his sheer power would rank him amongst the all-time greats. Kao-Cen Darach is, like Mundi, a dedicated swordsman. However, through his study of Naiman, he has been able to incorporate some high-level force abilities into his saber routines. His telekinetic abilities, as with Mundi, are his most advanced of his skill set. His basic force pushes are shown to have the skill to break through force shields, and offer a fair bit of power. He has also shown skill channeling telekinetic wave into the ground, commonly referred to as a force shockwave. His abilities with levitating and throwing objects is very impressive, able to throw reasonably large materials at his adversary with not too much effort. It should be noted that upon trying to lift a very large engine, probably weighing in at a few tons, he did succumb to exhaustion, which resulted in his ultimate demise. His force senses are also quite advanced, as Satil Shan stated that he may be gifted with foresight, able to see glimpses into the future and predict the return of the Sith. This was speculation on her part though, and wouldn't come into play in one-on-one combat anyway. His skill with physical augmentation was also shown to be very impressive, able to evade fast strikes with flips and spins, representative of the Sunmar rotations of Ataru. This enabled him to keep pace with two highly trained force wielders at once. Finally, he has shown high skills in the saber throw ability, guiding its trajectory with the force to save his student's life, and then bringing it back to his hand to defend himself. A very precise and also incredibly fast move happening before Vindicant could strike him down. Mundi clearly boasts a greater raw power and a wider array of skills. He has lifted heavier objects with less difficulty than Darach, who became exhausted after throwing a smaller object, as opposed to Mundi, who was fresh after lifting a far greater mass, whilst being injured at the time. One could form a strong argument in Darach's favour that he can incorporate his abilities better into combat, but the difference between them may not be as large as you would first think. Mundi has also shown such skill, and with greater blunt force. Also, on Hypori, though the general was able to evade the attack, Mundi was exhausted at the time, and could likely throw out the force push with less delay if he were fresh. Mundi has blasted opponents away. Darach has staggered them. The force push Darach demonstrated was strong, but not overwhelmingly so, clearly intended to be fast, keeping his opponent back, as opposed to outright incapacitating him. Darach's opponents did have force defences, but they may not have been all that. One was an apprentice dedicated to offence, and wouldn't have spent much time strengthening his force shield, if at all. Vindicant, on the other hand, was a Sith Inquisitor, and was first and foremost a force wielder. However, his force abilities were shown to be aggressive and offensive, and not restrained or defensive. He did create a force wall to block an RPG, but this was an active attempt to repel the attack. Against Darach's force push, he was lunging for a strike, not bracing himself for defence, and was thus not mustering any might specifically to shield himself, and yet, even so, he came out completely unharmed. His passive force barriers may have cushioned him from the blow, but upon the impact there didn't appear to be much resistance, and I could conclude that Darach essentially got a free shot. This is a great showing from Darach, exploiting his opponent's weaknesses with the force, as you would expect from a 9-man master, but I would again stress that it didn't amount to any real harm for his opponent, despite the fact his opponent was caught off guard, and he ultimately didn't try the same attack again, clearly feeling that without the exposed position Vindicant presented in that instance, he couldn't deal any game-changing harm to his opponent through a head-on telekinetic attack. In terms of raw power, Mundi outclasses both of these Sith combatants, and with his great experience and frontal approach, it would not be a stretch to assume Mundi's force defences would be tougher to get through than either Sith, an assumption backed up by the powers of the Jedi Sourcebook, placing his force defences comfortably amongst his fellow high-level Council Masters. Darach's force abilities can stagger and offer an annoyance to Mundi, but Mundi's have the potential to blast Darach away. Their physical augmentations cancel each other out, and I therefore feel the only physical differences fall into round 1 rather than their force prowess. The saber throw ability likely wouldn't come into play in a one-on-one engagement, and besides it's nothing Mundi couldn't deal with. Mundi also has the possibility of healing, though this again isn't likely to come into play. All in all, their supernatural abilities would mostly be a battle of telekinesis, and in this area Mundi overpowers his opponent. Combined with the fact that Mundi has a wider variety of abilities at his disposal, overall I give Mundi the advantage for round 3. And so I will now present my verdict. Though Darach wins the physical edge, Mundi is both the more advanced and compatible 1v1 duelist and the more powerful force user. However, sometimes one's total can add up to something greater or lesser than simply the sum of their abilities. So who would win? I believe Darach would start as the aggressor, as he was shown running into his fight, whereas Mundi holds his ground. Darach would be incapable of outright overwhelming Mundi, and Mundi would at some point manage to begin a counterattack, pushing Darach back. Darach would incorporate force abilities to stagger Mundi, but nothing would completely wipe him out. I think it most likely that Mundi would press forward as he always does, muscling through and dealing a killing blow. It is a possibility that when Mundi is off balance, or if he charges in too deep, Darach could deal a decisive counter. However, Mundi is no fool, and would stay on his toes. Anything Darach could throw at him, Mundi could throw back. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, it would only be so long before his guard faltered. And though his physical edge would allow him to last a while, and offers the possibility of retaliation, Mundi is no slouch, and I believe it would be too little too late for Darach in most scenarios, and Mundi would make it through. They are easily comparable to each other, and it would be a great fight, but Mundi's slightly reckless assault that sometimes works against him and his teammates would actually work in his favour in a one-on-one when ignoring external input, giving Mundi the intensity required to strike Darach down. Overall, the fight would turn out fairly close, though I do not see Darach as having enough strength or skill to prevail, and when it comes to dishing blows with the force, Mundi would eventually overpower his weary opponent. Though exhausted himself, I see Mundi being able to win the match about 75% of the time, and I therefore declare him the most likely victor. Anyways, that is it, my first Star Wars Versus video, with plenty more to come. I will try and make this Versus series a regular-ish thing, but until next time, share your thoughts in the comments, try to keep them PG, and may the Force be with you.